Hey, how's it going, everybody? Recently, there's been a lot of talk about a Rocket League Hall of Fame. A long time ago, myself and Lethmir discussed this possibly being a thing, what might go into the whole situation, and ideally what it would come to be, and the classifications and what would qualify you to be in that. I feel now is as good as a time of any to really start discussing this. Rocket League has now gone to a year-long season, which lasts about 10 and a half months, 11 months. It is also at that point, I think, in the game to where usually the first 5 years of an esport is kind of a learning process where a lot of different developers and organizations go through the same problems and the same hurdles, and then they really hit their stride. And I think Rocket League is about to do that. I think Rocket League as an esport, now that it's gotten through kind of the nitty-gritty and figuring out what works best for the esport, we're going to really see it hit its stride moving forward. And I think because it's got so many years of history now, with 5 years of history to build upon, building people and putting people into a Hall of Fame, I think now makes more sense than ever. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking openly about some of the things I think that should classify as people that get into the Hall of Fame or otherwise. And I also want to do this as a collective, because at the end of the day, it is not, in my opinion, supposed to be just a committee that makes these decisions. I think what the general fan feels, or the people that they advocate for, should also be part of the consideration, because at the end of the day, this is a community that is the reason why the game is so successful. So their and your input, I think, is important. So if you do have any ideas, any topics that are important, if you have certain suggestions about what should go into making a Hall of Fame, let me know in the comments down below. If there's certain people that you think should apply, that also is a great way to do it. I'm lucky that I've been a part of the Rocket League esports scene since the very first day. And I do have a lot of history and a lot of knowledge that comes with that about people that you may not know, especially if you're newer or came in during the free-to-play era. And I'll try to provide that insight along the way. But for the most part, if there's certain people that you think, or certain ideas or guidelines or stipulations for qualifying for these, and if we should have ballots and stuff, obviously we can always take ideas and examples from other leagues, as well as, you know, professional sports, which is where I think we should go because it's been around for a really long time. Let me know about those in the comments down below. But with that said, let's start talking about a true Rocket League Hall of Fame. Welcome back, everybody. Going to be talking about a Rocket League Hall of Fame and trying to create an early foundation. This is something that I'm probably going to undertake on my own unless other people want to get involved. Any content creators, possibly, if they watch this, if they want to start putting this into a more official site, by all means, reach out to me. But the Hall of Fame is something that I think can now basically be done. We have a precedent of a season that is a circuit-based, year-long event. You're going to see a lot more of the old guard starting to retire if things start to go in a certain way. And I think that's where it starts. So by definition, what the Hall of Fame is it is an institution honoring the achievements of individuals in a particular activity or field. And that can apply to a bunch of different ways. And this is where the classification stuff comes into play. Are we talking just players? Are we talking coaches? Are we talking content creators? Are we talking which classification of how we want to identify the important figures? I personally think you can have subcategories, or you can give nod to certain things, or you can talk about prolific moments when you're talking about specific plays. And this comes from, obviously, other scenes of like the NFL or the NBA and stuff, where they give credit to specific moments players play. Like, there's a bunch of different classifications that we can go upon. But I personally look at the Hall of Fame, and the Hall of Fame should be people that are not only extremely impactful to the reason for the success of this esport, but also players who are no longer doing it. I can't take a player like Garrett G and currently put them in the Hall of Fame because they're still trying through their career. They're not done or have hung up the cleats yet. They are still building upon their fame. Therefore, we can't put them in that conversation yet. And I think that applies to a lot of different players that have been suggested by the public. I personally think the number one thing is the Hall of Fame is going to only be people who are no longer doing it. Whether that classifies them as a coach, player, etc. I think you could take someone that is a player that is now a coach and put them in that category. I don't foresee that being an issue. And that's where I think the rules and the stipulations really have to come into play, is setting a specific criteria of what qualifies or not. The things that I would propose is I think it should be able to be players that are retired, coaches that are either former players that are retired or former coaches. I think you should be able to bring honorable mentions or people that are impactful. I'm talking about people like Uhtred and Cloud Fuel, and get the pioneers that made this scene happen in the first place. I think those people definitely should be in consideration. Do you want to classify them in the same spot as pros? Probably not, but I think you can do different categories for people that are of prolific status that have made changes throughout the game. I think that's really important. I think those are the people, and with the reason why I want to give them the love and attention is because without them, we would not be where we are today. So that stuff I also agree is very important. Now, the difficulty with the Hall of Fame of me doing it on an individual level is there is clearly a bias that goes into it. And that's why I have the difficulty of trying to coordinate and organize this, and why I'm asking for your help. And I'll have to think of a process on how to do it and give like my official nominees. At the end of the day, this is a subjective piece in my own personal opinion, hence it being on my channel. But in the future, if this does end up getting bigger than that, then we can start to bring in people on a committee or like an official guideline. Because when you're submitting someone into that level of status and you're giving them that credibility, the difficulty is you need differing opinions about whether you think they qualify or not. You need multiple opinions to make sure that there is a majority vote or something along those lines. But that is something that I'll, worry further down the road. I look at accomplishments being one of the major criteria, and I don't think that players who haven't won world championships necessarily can't be qualified. I do think there is certain players like Pashy who, although haven't won a world championship, have had really big performances and really big impact earlier on in the scene. And that seems to be the general consensus for a lot of people, where they think, nope, unless you have a world championship, you got to do it. Like, I look at a player like Overzero, who came in and yes, he won a world championship with iBuyPower, but outside of that one season, that one split in the first season, he hasn't really done anything. And I personally wouldn't put him in the Hall of Fame. I don't think there's any classification for it. I don't think there's any justification for it either. So there is going to be certain things where you need those other and differing opinions to provide context to the situation as to why or why not. You need to have that discussion or that debate as to why those things matter. Personally, if I'm looking at my first kind of bids, you have to then determine how many people, how many you want to encourage to get in right away. I think you start small. I don't think you start with like 5 or 6 or 10 or whatever. I think you start with like a couple. I think you start with 2, maybe 3, and make sure that those 3 are solidified. Ones that you think are more deserving than anybody else. People like Cloud Fuel, people who unanimously are going to talk about someone like Marky Duda. People of that prolific status that people know and love from this game, that also had a major impact not only outside of the game, but also as a professional. Those are the topics of discussion that I think are more important than ever, and making it so it is a very, very difficult thing, and making sure that only X amount of people can get in. I think we should be able to have a bunch of different nominations and have a large nomination pool, but the ones that actually get in every single year, I think is going to make it to where you can then actually have this be a process that extends year after year. We don't know how long some of these pros are going to play for. We don't know if there's going to be a certain point where it comes down to it and you're like, I honestly don't know if we can invite anybody to the Hall of Fame this year. I don't want that to be a problem in the future. Now, I'm looking at a thread on the subreddit that is kind of sparking this whole conversation, and a majority of it lists a ton of people that are active players and a ton of people that agree with that. And I hate to break it to everybody, that's not what the Hall of Fame is. The Hall of Fame is not about giving accolades to the players that have been around for a long time. It is the ones that are the most impactful after their time is up. And there is the argument for certain players that have decided to stick around for too long and have tainted or tarnished their, I guess, prolific status, if you want to call it that. I mean, you look at people that are suggesting Cookser, Krendovi, Turbo, K-Dop, Gary G. All 5 of those players are still actively playing in the league. Therefore, in my opinion, they don't meet the criteria to get into the Hall of Fame in the first place. They have to hang up the cleats and be done. And then we can look at their body of work that they've put on display for us and be like, okay, now they're in consideration. And there's so many people that agree with this stuff. And it's like, this is why I have a little bit of nervousness of bringing in like a consensus or a general vote from the public. Because when you have a bunch of people that, you know, are just like, oh, I picked my favorite one, it doesn't really work out that well. There's got to be a vetting process with the committee, etc. There is some people that do bring up the expectation of it going to be players, and that's when it kind of goes back to my original point of, I don't think it should be just players. It should be people outside of the game as professionals, because you talk about people like Shaldis and Cloudfield, like I've mentioned numerous times, that immediately, and I do agree with some of the people in the thread, they come to mind almost instantly, because without them, this game doesn't get where it is in the first place. So the concern I have, and I guess the biggest question I have for you guys, is how would you implement that? Would you have separate categories or honorable mentions or figures where you want to separate it for professionals, content creators, etc.? Because then you can talk about people like Sunless Con and stuff, but you know, who knows when those guys are going to be done, and it just completely adds a different variable and changes everything up about, I'm putting the classification of the pros have to be retired, does the same thing apply to like content creators? And that's where it comes into play. You then look at the classification of, like I mentioned with coaches, I look at Fireburner. Fireburner is also another high impact player and a big reason for the success of this esport, but he's now a coach. So is he able to be brought into the Hall of Fame under a player status, but even though he's still active as a coach with version 1? That is another topic of conversation, which I personally think he should be able to go in, because he is no longer performing in the game. Again, I think this one is going to take a lot more work than people think, and bringing in the right people I think are really important as well as people from different backgrounds, from different regions and everything as well, because I think there's going to be an inherent bias towards North America and Europe, and rightfully so, because they've been around for the longest, as well as have the best performances. But at the same time, you look at other regions like South America and OCE, and now with the addition of 4 other regions, it could do a very big thing for this game and expanding that horizon. You need representation for all of these, and I think it's a really important topic, but I do want to provide and give credit to the people that have made this game in a really important way. And the way that comes to be is a Hall of Fame of sorts, but I also think there's other ways you can do it, kind of like a lifetime achievement award as we've seen in other past. But ultimately, I'm curious on what you guys think. Your guys' suggestions. I wanted this to be more of an introduction and kind of get the thought process going. I can tell you right now, if I was to nominate 3 people, Cloudfuel is number 1. Probably Marky Duda as a player is up there. And then for the third, I would have to do a little bit more thinking about. But ultimately, most of the suggestions in the Reddit thread, can't say I take any of them because they're still playing, and it defeats my qualification purpose. But I'm curious on what you guys think. Let me know in the comments down below. Thoughts, ideas, Hall of Fame stuff. This video, I will admit, was kind of all over the place just because I'm trying to actively think about this. And it's not something that has been well refined, but I also want to do that refinement process that makes the public happy about how the decisions are being made as well. So your guys' feedback and opinions are the most important. If you know people that are kind of interested in this stuff, make sure you share it around and ask people. But I do think a Hall of Fame of sorts would be a really cool concept, and partnering maybe with Lethmir to do like an in-game map on the workshop that gets constantly updated, I think would be awesome as well. A lot of work on a bunch of different sides, but again, can't do it without you guys. So any questions, comments, concerns, let me know down below, suggestions and everything as well. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.